I was born in Redwood, New York.
West Columbia, Texas, on the 7th of December, 1938.
I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
I was born in Lansing, Michigan, 1946.
I lived in East St. Louis, Illinois, until I was 11. My mother died. My dad moved us down to North Texas, Grayson County.
I grew up in a small town, rural town, upstate New York. Mother was a school teacher, father was a justice of the peace, and he had a business converting coal furnaces to oil.
My pre-teen years were pretty much raised on a farm, learning how to drive on a John Deere tractor and an old Ford pickup truck.
Graduated from Bells High School, little tiny school up in North Texas, 700 people in the whole town, 27 kids in my graduating class.
Just grew up with 5 inland lakes around where I live. I had a boat on the lake when I was in my teens, and just really enjoyed the area.
My 3rd birthday, which was the 7th of December, 1941. And about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, after the meal and everything, my Papa was there and some more of my kinfolks, and they got the news that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And I, of course, at that time, did not understand what all it meant. But in the next couple of years, there was constant movements up and down the highway in front of where we lived of troops, National Guard, coastal artillery, things like that. And that was probably the beginning of my attraction to the military.
And then in 1966, Vietnam was going pretty heavy then. And I had to sign up for the draft when I turned 18. And all my friends in high school were starting to go. And almost joined the Navy with a buddy of mine. We went down to the reserve center and I stood behind the formation and I said, no, they aren't green or camouflaged, so I'm not gonna join them. And I can't swim very far anyway, so I decided I'm gonna go join the Army. So I joined rather than get drafted, so that hopefully I would have my choice of what I would be able to do.
When I turned 17 years old, in 1955, I told my father that I wanted to go in the Army. So my dad took me down to the recruiting station to talk to the recruiter, and he agreed to sign the papers, and he did. And on the 18th of January, 1956, I was sworn in Abilene, Texas at the main recruiting station for West Texas area, myself and about 25 other guys.
I joined the Marine Corps because someone dared me and told me that I'd never make it. And I'm the type of individual, don't tell me I can't do something, because I'm going to show you that I can. So that's why I joined the Marine Corps.
Went to 3 semesters of college, which made me a Rhodes Scholar in the Marines. I learned how to type, and that probably saved my life in Vietnam. Went over as a 20-year-old.
Started off I thought the Army was pretty great, because I spent 10 days living in a hotel in Abilene because a West Texas ice storm moved in and we couldn't go nowhere. So I thought the Army was pretty good. I was eating 3 meals a day, riding the elevator, doing things I had never done before. And then 10 days later, they put us on a plane, sent us to Fort Ord, California, and my world turned upside down.
Flying to California was the first time I'd ever been on an airplane. So, you're talking about a country kid, 20 years old, really big experience. Landed in San Diego, got off the plane, congregated with 5 or 6 other Marines, all going to the recruit depot, went over to a desk where a Marine was sitting, and I said, we're here for Marine boot camp. He didn't even look up. One of the guys I was with lit a cigarette. I said, excuse me, we're here for Marine boot camp. He didn't look up, so I looked at the other guys and shrugged my shoulders and said, excuse me, and he stood up and slapped the cigarette out of the guy's mouth next to me. and our world changed from, from that moment.
Basic training, Fort Knox, Kentucky, 1966 in March, in springtime. And they shipped us, a bunch of us, down from Detroit on a bus. And we drive in there and they offload the bus, and we're standing in front of these World War II wooden billets up on posts so that you can see underneath them. Why they did that, I don't know yet, but probably just give us another place to clean. And the little pads outside the building there had little footprints painted on it. So finally, somebody come around, had a stripe on his shoulder, and if he said jump, we said how high? And he said, now I want you all to line up, and each one of you put a foot on them little painted feet there. And he said, you don't move off of them. So right away, we started learning the basics of basics.
My first impressions were when I got in San Diego and got off the bus, and it had to have been about, I don't know, 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, they yelled at us, get off the bus. And I got off the bus, and this drill instructor jumped right on my feet, front of my feet. And I thought at that time, boy, did I screw up.
We spent a few days getting processed in, getting clothing and shots and inspected, rejected, and the old Alice's Restaurant song. And you go with that Group W over there, sitting on the bench.
Everybody got a crew cut. I watched them cut molds off the heads of guys. That was back during the hippie generation. I watched them like shearing sheep, take this long hair off of hippies. Didn't matter what your ethnicity was, you all got the same haircut. They gave us our clothes, which were green utilities. That was before everybody got the camo gear. I think they intentionally gave all of us clothes that were too big and caps that were too big because we looked so ridiculous in our clothes.
You know, it was a good experience because it really prepared me, for what, I was about to encounter. And I had no idea what I was going to encounter. So after that, I went home for Christmas holidays, and in January, I flew back out to staging in California. I got orders, and I was to report to the 3rd Marine Division in Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii.
So I stood, my wife stood at the window looking out the plane. I got on the plane and sat where I could see her, and I watched her there on the other side of the window crying as we pulled away from the concourse and began taxiing down the runway. So the last thing I saw was my new little wife crying her eyes out.
Well, I think probably, if I really think back on it, what I did was just took a quick look around and said, I hope I get back here. All the training that I've had is going to come into play now. How? I don't know. But I guess I'm about as prepared as I can be. I just hope I make it back.
Took a taxi and went over to the airport and checked in to verify that my flight was still scheduled to go and everything. And I remember I went outside and just looked around because I thought, I'm fixing to leave. I don't know if I'll ever come back. And I found a payphone and called my wife and talked to her for one last time until I saw her the next time was 9.5 months later on R&R in Hawaii.
We went to Okinawa on a ship. The whole division went where we were loaded onto ships and sailed for Okinawa, which took approximately a month to get there. I don't know if it was because of the typhoons, but we went through two typhoons on our trip over. And that in itself was incredibly scary.
We had flown from Hawaii to Okinawa. And in Okinawa, we got all of our shots and our jungle camo, all of the gear we were going to need in Vietnam. And then we flew from Okinawa to Vietnam. And it wasn't a full flight. I remember I was sitting up close to the front and had the row to myself. You know, looked out at that Pacific Ocean for a long, long time, curious about what it was going to be like. Very well trained, very well prepared. No matter what was going to be thrown at me, I knew I could handle it. But as we began to descend in Da Nang, there was low cloud cover, so we couldn't see anything coming in. No one was talking to anyone. Very quiet on the plane. We were all Marines. The pilot got on the PA system and said that his previous landing in Da Nang, which was a week or 10 days earlier, the plane got hit with small arms fire and with mortar fire. And he said one of the Marines, you know, got a Vietnam medal, a campaign medal, and a Purple Heart in an hour. He was hit before he could make his way to the hangar. So he said, when I land, I want all of you to disembark quickly, and as soon as you get off the plane, run to the hangar. So we were all prepared to be you know, engaged in combat from the moment we got off the plane. Fortunately, there was no gunfire that day, and we were able to land and get off safely.
We knew that we were going to make an amphibious landing, which meant that we were going to go down the side of the ship on, can't remember what they call them, deploying ropes, where you just climb down. And, you know, and that is dangerous in itself, because it's, you know, you can slip and, you know, break your neck or hit the boat as it's rocking. But from what I understand, I was told that was the first major amphibious landing, you know, on a foreign country since World War II. But when we were just expecting the worst when we hit the beach. Well, that was not the case. You know, the ramps went down, and all of a sudden we see all these people standing around with cameras. You know, like, okay. So that was the first thing that I saw that was totally unexpected.
I think as soon as they opened the door on that airplane was the smell. Probably, and as the more I think about it, it was a charcoal smell, because they use charcoal for everything, heating, cooking, and they had to make their charcoal. So that smell just permeated the air. And then as you step out of the plane, you wonder, am I going to get shot right here? Because you don't know. Nobody talked much about it, what to expect when you get there, except that you were going to go to a replacement depot.
Well, the first day in Vietnam is kind of burned in my mind. Everyone there was very serious. We didn't see any of the rigidness that we had, that Marines are exposed to stateside. It was all business. So, you know, they checked our papers, made sure our papers were all in order. They checked our gear, make sure we had all the right gear. They gave us our assignments. Mine was for Hill 63, which was 25 miles south of Da Nang, also called LZ Baldy. But I wasn't able to go there yet, so they assigned me to a transit company, which is just a place to wait until they're ready to make the transport. And my first night there, I went in with two other guys into this transit company, and they put us in a Quonset hut, or I guess it was a tent at that time, and it was full of cots but the cots were all a mess. They were torn and ripped, and we were able to find 3 cots that would hold us. Mine had a big tear down the middle, so I would sag in the cot as I laid in place. And even that afternoon, we went out. That was our assignment while we were in transit, was to string Constantine wire. It was so hot, so unbelievably hot. But we strung Constantine wire beginning that day, and for about a week, about 10 days, from early in the morning until late at night.
I had never experienced heat like I felt as soon as we got off the beach. It was 133 degrees when we hit the beach. And, you know, within probably 1 hour, I was in the back of an Amtrak because I started having symptoms of heat stroke. I was going into heat exhaustion, and so they put me in the back of this Amtrak, which I didn't quite understand either because they don't have air conditioning. And, you know, inside of those things, it gets pretty warm.
My first night there, when the sun went down, I'd eaten something bad, and that evening I got food poisoning and just was really, really sick and running from all orifices. And so in the middle of the night, I got up and ran to the head and was really having a hard time there in the head. And without knowing it, we were just on the other side of the fence line, on the other side of a tree line, from a battery of 105 howitzers, which were just, I couldn't tell you, not far behind us. And they did battery adjust in the middle of the night and began firing those howitzers. And although that's where I was assigned, was to a battery, I didn't know what those sounded like, and I thought we were under rocket attack. I thought we were being hit with rockets. It's hard to explain the thunderous noise those things make. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to die sitting here on this head with my pants down around my ankles on my first day in country. But I survived.
There was a constant pressure of the unknown. You never knew what was going to happen. You never knew when a grenade would be tossed, somebody come out from behind a building and start shooting, when a rocket would come in, when a mortar would come in, when it would be safe to sleep. So you're always on edge, you're always ready. So there was no relaxation. That's why when you've heard of the airplane flights home, when the pilot says, we are now at 32,000 feet on the way home out of Vietnam territory, the whole plane exploded in an uproar of, thank God, I made it.
There was such a turmoil and people hating the war and hating everything else.
They told us in Okinawa that we were not going to be well received when we got back. They told us that people would throw eggs at us. They told us that people would throw stale tomatoes at us and those kinds of things.
Whenever you drove your car, if you had your uniform on, you'd get tomatoes thrown at you. A couple bricks were in hands, but never got thrown at my window.
Well, when we were on the plane, they were telling us, you know, when you leave San Francisco to go home, do not wear your uniform. And, you know, we didn't know what was going on at home. And when we got home and landed in San Francisco, it was not pleasant, you know, at all.
If you don't go through it, then it's all hearsay and you don't really know what it was or what it was like. Well, I did come back. And of course, in Vietnam, you don't have any regular clothing. All you have is military fatigues. You don't even have a dress uniform. So when I come back into, I believe it was San Francisco, they issued us new Class A clothing. So you walk out the gate dressed in a brand new uniform with all the medals and everything on it. and you have to start dodging people so you don't get spit on.
As we were coming in to land at LA International, a man sitting kind of catty-corner from us over there turned to us and he said, Marines, you might should take your colors off, the ribbons, kind of telling your story that you're in Vietnam. He said, you might want to take your colors off so people don't know that you're Vietnam veterans. And so while we were kind of talking about that, whether or not that was the right thing to do, a big bass baritone voice from 2 or 3 rows back heard that. I don't know who it was, but he said, you Marines, wear your colors, show your colors. And you know, that was enough for us to leave those colors on as we left the plane.
The abuse that we received, we didn't understand that. For having been over in Vietnam. And that went on for quite a while.
And even when I got back to the little small town that I lived in, there were few people that would come up and shake your hand.
It was just one of those things where you ended up having to wear your civvies and change and drive out of the base not in uniform. You never walked around in uniform any place.
I remember that my wife met me, and my oldest daughter at that time was 3 years old, and there was a guy standing there, you know, blocking it. Nobody's gonna go out on the tarmac to the plane, and I come in on one of those little 20-passenger planes and landed, and I'm coming down that little stairwell thing, and my daughter ran right between this guy's legs, and it looked like she leaped about 100 feet, you know, and just landed in my arm. And that was a great feeling. I have some very dear friends on that wall that I served many a years in other parts of the world before Vietnam, at different assignments at different places, that didn't come back. And they didn't see their children grow up. They didn't see their grandchildren grow up. And in my mind, they're like stuck at 29 and 30 years old or older, because they're still, in my mind, they're still alive. And they're still, and that wall is a representation of every one of those guys and gals and what they stood for.
Dealing with anger, and without medication, I don't know what I'd do. Because it rewires you. I mean, it truly does. And, you know, I go to therapy every week. And I only started doing this 7 or 8 months ago. So I lived with it for a long time. You know, I don't need help. I can deal with it myself. You know, I don't want to say control freak, but I know that's what got me through what I came through. You know, to me, I don't know how anybody could go out or go to Vietnam or a situation like that, or for that matter in Afghanistan or Iraq, and not come home without having PTSD. I don't know how that can happen, because you know, you're trained to kill, and I didn't like it. Still don't. I mean, no, I'm not going there.
The PTSD can be very mild, or it can be very traumatic, and it can come and it can go. And the VA, in all of their wisdom, decided that, yes, Mr. Botek, you do have PTSD from an incident in Vietnam, and we would be happy to treat you for it if you would like. So I did spend a few sessions with a psychologist. Of course, they don't ever say you're cured. They just say, well, we think you can handle it. Go about your business. And if you ever need us again, just give us a call. Pick up the phone. We'll be right there for you. Okay.
My approach in life with anything has always been, and I was taught this as a kid, no matter what you do or what you attempt to do or what you're involved with, always look for something that you can say to yourself that there are some positive things that came from it. I learned something. And I mean it when I say that I don't know that I can specifically pinpoint anything that made me a better person when I was in Vietnam. To me, it was a waste of time and a waste of money, and most importantly, a waste of good lives from it.
If anybody can ever go to Washington, D.C., I've been there 3 times to see the actual wall. It is amazing. And the thing about it is that the representation that was here, or which was like 80% of the actual size, is just as emotional for me as standing and looking at the real thing, because what it represents is that's a whole generation that's just gone.
It hits home. It hits home, seeing the wall. I haven't been to the one in D.C., but I'm going to go, but I don't know how I'm going to deal with it. I'll find out when I go.
When you see that thing in the actual size with that black, shiny marble granite in Washington, D.C., it's amazing, especially when the sun hits it and it bounces those rays back, or it's in a slightly rainy day and the rainwater's running down on it and it's just glistening like it really just reaches out and grabs you.
It's a very sobering experience. I think, all of us have gotten on with our lives and established. Here I am 67. I mean, I've lived 3 lifetimes since I got back from Vietnam. Yet when I get around that wall, it rockets me back to being 20 years old again, 21 years old again. And that's just, those memories come flushing back. The smells, the sounds, everything about it comes flushing back. Today you have young men and women now putting their lives on the line and losing their lives and receiving much more praise for their sacrifice now than those of us who went before them did. But there still seems to be a diminishing of patriotism, which I don't understand. This is still a good country. It's the best country in the world. There are approaching 7 billion people in the world. Only 330 million of us live here in this nation, and yet we're so blessed. We're so very blessed. And to a large extent, maybe entirely to an extent, it's because of young men and women who are willing to lay their lives on the line and pay the ultimate price. And everyone should be grateful for that.
And I remember when my grandfather passed away and I was in the Army, I thought, wow, boy, did I make a big mistake. I could have learned all the things from him that he knew starting from 1900 forward. So I tell my grandchildren now, anything you ever want to know about my past or how things were or what do you remember, you feel free to ask. Because when I'm gone and people like me are gone, who are you going to ask?